A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers and those who are joining us via Second Advent Radio. We are delighted to be with you on the airways and on the social media. And those who are joining us, we are so grateful. We are delighted that you have chosen to join us this afternoon. Of course, we have been for the last 2 weeks discussing the subject of religious liberty and Sabbath observance. It has been a delight for us to explore these varying aspects. Your responses during the program and even after the program is quite an indication that this was a meaningful subject. We are going to be starting with the discourse. I just want to remind you of who our special guests are. Still waiting on two of them to join. We have with us at the moment attorney Lloyd West. Lloyd West is, of course, an attorney out of the Thomas John and Company firm in Antigua. We are delighted for his presence and very meaningful contribution. Elder West, good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk again.
Good afternoon, Dr. Greene. Good afternoon to the listeners out there, and happy Sabbath to all. Happy to be here.
And we also have with us attorney, pastor, Dr. Gangala. I always make a mistake with his name, pastor. Gandalal Singh. Gandalal Samlal Singh. I got it right now. Delighted to have you with us this afternoon. We missed you last week, but we do understand it was for a good cause.
Yes.
Very meaningful discussion last week. Welcome. It's a joy to have you today.
Yes, I did look at the program in the night, Saturday night. So it was very, very informative and insightful.
Indeed, yes. We have a third guest who has not yet joined us. She will be with us shortly. Attorney Natasha Baker, coming from the USVI. She is going to be with us in just a few minutes, but we are going to get started. Okay, here comes Natasha. I was just going to say we will get started and introduce Attorney Baker in a minute, but Attorney Baker has just joined us. Delighted to have you with us. Attorney Baker, welcome to Let's Talk. It has been a wonderful discussion for the last 2 weeks, and we're happy that you're able to make it for this final in this particular series.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. Good afternoon again, everyone. It's good to be here. I'm delighted to continue the conversation this afternoon.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. I'm so delighted for the sacrifice that you all have made. I know, Attorney Baker, that you are on another mission, and we're thankful that you're able to interrupt your schedule to accommodate us. This afternoon, we continue the discussion. We have a few questions unanswered from our guests. But before we go any further, we want to bow our heads forward of prayer, shall we? Father, be with us as we go into this discussion today. Grant us your presence, give us wisdom, be with our guests as they respond to these important issues. Take full control, and may your grace, your mercy, peace be upon us in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I thought it would be a good thing for us. Well, let me just provide a brief summary in the event that somebody is joining us for first time. If you missed the last 2 weeks, just to let you know that I have been speaking with these amazing attorneys, Wes Baker and Samlal Singh. Samlal Singh is also a pastor. In fact, he serves as the stewardship director of the Caribbean Union now. Delighted that they're able to join with us. And we have been looking at issues relating to the matter of freedom of conscience in religion, constitutional provisions for us to worship, the issues relating to Sabbath and employment, issues relating, last week we spoke to the matter of maybe I should say the vexing matter of what is now referred to as somebody's playing some Christmas carols there, and that's all right. but we address the matter of essential services and how do we relate to it. We want to today continue with a few questions that we had last week, and then we will go into talking to issues of challenging careers, those things that may prove problematic, and what protection we can expect if we knowingly enter one of these professions, knowing that it's going to be a challenge. We also want to talk to the issue of, I want to term it the matter of being able to, I think it was Dr. Samlal Singh who raised this issue 2 weeks ago, relating to religious practices that may be annoying to others, and to what extent are we willing to accommodate the matter of tolerance. To what extent are we able to tolerate another person's religious perspective who may be different from ours? Religious liberty is not just about protecting Seventh-day Adventists, it's about protecting people and acknowledging the matter of freedom of religion. But let's start with a few questions, because last week and the week before, we had a few questions, outstanding questions. I want to begin with this question. We were discussing the matter of constitutional issues and labor codes and the like. I don't know what it is in St. Croix. I don't know what it is in St. Thomas, that is. I don't know what it is in Trinidad. But in Antigua, there is a labor code. And this person is asking the labor code of Antigua, and perhaps Attorney West, you may be able to tell me whether this is true or not, but this individual says that the labor code of Antigua was adjusted to indicate that Sabbath is a regular working day. What impact does this have on Seventh-day Adventists? This is what the person is asking. And maybe we can broaden it in territories where Saturday is a regular working day. I'm not sure what the labor code says on that. I think I'm familiar enough with the Antigua labor code. I know that there was some discussion on making Sunday a regular work day, but Attorney West, can you comment on that?
Dr. Greene, it is the case that there has been an adjustment to make it a regular working day, but that really does not impact the issue of religious liberty, as it does the issue of how employers compensate individuals for working on that day. So it's really a question of addressing compensation as opposed to issue of religious liberty. So you know that if you're working on a day that's not a regular working day, then if it is considered a holiday, then you would have to pay the employee time and a half. And so that really is just addressing an issue of employer-employee, the manner of compensation in the contract. But as it relates to the issue of religious liberty, the question of the individual's conscience and whether the individual works on Sabbath or works on any question of that, that adjustment does not affect the issue of whether the Sabbath is a day that individuals should have taken off as a day to observe, right? So the adjustment in the Antigua Labor Code does not impact how the Labor Code looks at employees working on the Sabbath and the obligation to work on the Sabbath. It's not intended to address that.
Well, let me ask a follow-up question to all three of you, because every now and then labor codes and laws are adjusted. How diligent should we be? Should we be bothered at all? Should we be groping over these matters every time we hear that there's a debate in Parliament concerning the adjustment to a labor code or to some issue? From your perspective as attorneys, how should we relate to that? Or if we hear that there is, for example, in Trinidad, there is a bill that is going to make Saturday a regular work day, or that is going to change something that is going to impact religious liberty. Now, I'm kind of stepping on the matter of how involved should we be as a church in pressuring governments to pass legislations, that kind of thing. That's what I'm addressing here. So should we just stand by idly and say, well, we elect governments, parliamentarians to deal with laws and let them do what they're doing and we accept?
Mhm. Right. Can I respond?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, it is a balancing act as it relates to legislation and governments enacting legislation, because the legislature has to take into consideration not just one particular religious body, but all the religious bodies in that particular state. As it relates to Trinidad, Saturday is a normal working day. And so, for example, if, there's a public holiday, let's say it is Christmas or Diwali or Eid that falls on the Saturday, it's normal. If that should fall on a Sunday, then you will get the public holiday on the Monday. But as far as Saturday is concerned, it's a normal working day. So the labor laws of Trinidad does not make any differentiation as it relates to religious bodies and their practices being able to have some kind of freedom to do it on that particular day, which is Saturday. So it's a normal working day.
Okay.
And just to add to that, to your question about whether we should be involved, and I think we should. I think that it's important for us to, when there are legislation generally that impact our ability to worship, we should have a voice. Not a rambunctious voice, but a voice to let legislators know that, whatever they're putting in place could potentially impact us. Now, the specific scenario of Saturday being a working day, as Attorney West indicated, to some extent, it may not, that's the norm in many places, and it may not have a direct impact on our ability to worship or to have the day off. And so our plea wouldn't necessarily be, oh, don't make Saturday a normal working day. But whatever impact that legislation could have on our ability to worship or our ability to not work on Saturday, I think that we should have a body of persons, and I think those persons essentially contemplated to be the parole department, to go before the legislature or Congress or whatever parliamentary body that exists in Antigua or Trinidad, to let them know, hey, you have a group of people here who can be impacted by this legislation. Here is how, and here is how it can be worded so that it wouldn't violate our rights.
Can I add something, Dr. Greene?
Sure.
What I do know is in the past, some governments in Trinidad, as it relates to enacting laws that may affect religious practices, they have invited religious leaders to make their submissions as it relates to that. I know that would have happened some time ago in Trinidad. So I don't know to what extent it happens elsewhere.
Well, I wanted to refer back to a situation we had in Antigua recently, where coming out of the issue, as well, some of you may know that Antigua is tourism based, and there was a challenge with the hoteliers, I want to think, because Sunday, when you treat Sunday as a public holiday, then hoteliers with people who are working the shift system would now have to be paying overtime for that kind of service. And so there was a proposal to make Sunday a regular work day. And that created quite a stir. In fact, I remember that religious leaders were called. I remember we went to meet with the Attorney General. When we have these kinds of situations, I'm asking a question here that is involving relationships with other religious bodies, when we have these kinds of situations and we see a coming together, there are some persons who believe that as Seventh Adventists, we should not associate with other people of other religious faiths. So let's speak to this issue now. I remember on that occasion, of course, as Seventh Adventists, we were not being directly impacted because it was Sunday, that was the discussion. But I was asked to speak, and I remember saying that while I am a Seventh Adventist and while we are not being directly impacted, that we would want to make sure that everybody has the right to worship freely according to their religious conviction. And in a situation like that, we would be willing to join with the Sunday worshipers in asking for protection if their day of worship were to be threatened. Now, you all are attorneys and involved in religious liberty in your local churches and conferences, etc., and so on. Some persons may not quite understand that response, that the Seventh Adventist Church would join with another religious organization to protect them, to defend their right to worship on the day that they choose. Can we speak to that very quickly in terms of the matter of tolerance?
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me begin by stating that, and if I should read for you the provisions of the Constitution of Trinidad, it says, the Constitution provides for freedom of conscience and religious belief and observance, including worship. The law prohibits, and this is critical, the law prohibits acts of sedition and seditious intent, which includes endangering or promoting feelings of ill will towards, hostility to, or contempt for any class of inhabitants, including based on religious beliefs. So, quite clear, the Constitution makes it, a matter of freedom of conscience and religious practice across the board for anybody. So, religious liberty does not mean religious liberty for the Seventh-day Adventist Church alone, but it guarantees religious liberty for every religious body in that particular jurisdiction.
Why is it important for us as Seventh-day Adventists to protect others who may be having challenges with their freedom to worship on which day or how they want? Why is it important for us?
I think just piggybacking and adding on to Council Samuel Singh's, Pastor Samuel Singh's point. First of all, we agree as Seventh-day Adventists that there is the freedom of conscience that comes with the Constitution, but also we believe in freedom of choice and the right to choose. The reality is, as Seventh-day Adventists, as persons who have as a fundamental belief that God gives us the right to choose, then we must also accept that other persons as well have the right to choose. And so we should not be supporting the infringement of other persons' religious rights and rights to choose. It would be good as well that in providing this support for individuals who are having the governments of the day infringe upon their rights, in providing support for them, we may also find that in these days, there may come a time when there will be an infringement on our rights. So it's good for us to have a principle of supporting religious liberty. That is what we believe in, the right to choose and to freely choose which religion that an individual wants to worship with. And if it does come a time that our rights and freedoms are infringed, we would also need and seek the support of other religious bodies as well. So it comes down to our fundamental principles, constitutional principles, but also biblical principles that we have. Every individual does have the right to worship in the way that they so choose.
Yes, and just to add to that, Galatians 5:13 talks about freedom. For you are called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. So, I think that we believe that the whole premise of God's love is that we're free to choose, how we want to worship. And with that premise and that belief coming out of even our own belief system, it is important for us to support others' right to choose how they would like to worship. And the system of ministering, of preaching the gospel and converting people can only work where people are free to choose and to worship. And so therefore, as Seventh-day Adventists, we would want to promote that for everyone, so that when they do hear the word of God being preached, when they hear things about Christ and the Bible, that because they already have that religious freedom, they can navigate themselves within that premise freely, without any pressures. And as Attorney West stated, there's beauty in numbers. So a lot of times, as Seventh-day Adventists, we're the minority. And once we support our brothers and sisters out there, as long as we're supporting it for a good cause, which is their freedom to worship, then that may be them coming to our aid at some point, because we've built that relationship. And so therefore, if we were to rally for some sort of religious freedom within our realm, we would already have an alliance that would increase our numbers, and it wouldn't just be something that Seventh-day Adventists are rallying for, but you have a community of persons who believe that all religions should have freedom to worship.
I believe as Christians, we all take seriously this notion, this concept that we are created with the power of choice. And having been created with the power of choice means that God himself is going to respect the choice that we make ultimately. Now, some persons, I'm still on the matter of tolerance for other religious perspectives. The Constitution and the provisions in the United Nations for this matter of freedom of conscience didn't just say freedom for one to change his or her religion, but freedom also to have no religion if you so desire. We had a discussion some time ago. In fact, I was on a particular panel or committee rather with preachers from other religious faiths, and the matter of to what extent should we sit back and allow people to form religions? And somebody specifically says, well, suppose somebody decides that their official religion, and we have this at least in one Caribbean state, is voodoo. How should we as Christians relate to that? Should we say that, listen, we don't want that in our territory, we're going to demonstrate against it, we are going to ask our members to write petitions against it? It is not something that we consider to be wholesome. How do we relate to those things in the matter of practicing religious freedom?
Yeah, and that's always a very tough balancing act, Dr. Greene. And, that's, one of the hardest questions, that comes about when you talk about religious freedom. And it's one that is even troubling to religious liberty leaders, because you truly have to ask, how far do you take it? Do you support, just like you use an example, do you support polygamy, for example, the freedom to marry more than one person, which is a belief of some religious practices. And just going back to the text that I just quoted, you don't use your freedom for opportunity for flesh. So we have to be wise in what we support. And I want to be careful in saying this, because I don't want it to sound like I'm going back on what I said last time, but we have to look at the end result for whatever we're supporting. Now, I don't understand, and I won't pretend to understand all the, nuances of voodoo. to be able to speak to that today. But to some extent, there are some things that may be in conflict to what we would promote or preach as Seventh-day Adventists. And so we have to be careful in what we directly go out and promote, that we're not contradicting what we believe as Seventh-day Adventists. And I think when we run into that realm, when we run into that sphere, is where we have to be careful. So it's not, and then the next question you have to ask yourself, well, if we're not supporting it, do we go out and directly speak against it? So we rally against it. And I know we're speaking about Sabbath here, but this comes into play a lot when we speak about homosexual relations. You know, we believe in freedom of choice. How do we handle that as Christians? You know, do we go out and rally against it? Do we stay quiet? What do we say in that regard? And so I think there is some sort of balancing act that comes about at some point that we need to decide as religious liberty leaders. Is this something that we rally for? Is this something that we allow to happen, but we don't directly speak to? And to be honest, I don't necessarily have the answer for that. But I think it's important for us to recognize that those types of situations will arise. And as a church, we need to figure out how we would take one stance and either support or not support, or support to the extent that we don't rally against. Maybe that's more a question for you, Dr. Greene. How do you guys normally handle something like that? I think that's a very difficult question when you talk about certain types of religion.
But it perhaps is troubling, but I'm going to come to you in a minute, Dr. Samuel Singh. But, you know, I can say that as a church, this is our position. You know, and I want to use, for example, Islam or Hinduism or some other religious practice that we do not support, we do not believe to be the right way to go. But we can say this is our position, but at the same time, everybody has the freedom to choose what they want to choose. We can call you out of, you know, this whole matter of religious diversity. I remember a few years ago, we had a religious liberty seminar, and the theme was the whole matter of coexisting, and how do I respect your freedom, but at the same time, I am calling you out of what I consider to be wrong to join what I consider to be right. So I can say that definitely as a church, we believe that that particular path is not right, but we do respect people's individual choices. There's also the matter of the law of the land locally. So in some territories, in Antigua, for example, that particular religious practice is outlawed. Now, as to whether the government, we should say that a particular religious practice is outlawed is another story, but that's an interesting perspective. Pastor Samuel Singh, you were going to make a point.
Yes, well, of course, you touched on it a bit, and that is in the particular jurisdiction where certain religious practices are not lawful. In such a case, as a church, we can advocate that, you know, we are not in support of. But in terms of religious liberty, we stand in solidarity and support with religious bodies, but we may not specifically be in support with some of the tenets of their religious practices. But we may support the idea of religious liberty for that particular body without identifying that we are in support of their beliefs or whatever, but in freedom of conscience for them to practice their religious belief.
Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit and deal with this other aspect. There are some career choices.
Mhm.
To talk of this matter of challenging careers with respect to Sabbath observance, because our discussion is really about Sabbath observance. And so let's say I decide that I want a job desperately. And I realize that this job is going to be problematic in terms of Sabbath observance, but I'm still going to take it. And I'm going to go to my religious leader to help me fight to get that, because the Constitution says that I should have the freedom to practice my religion. So I'm talking about careers like the aviation industry. If I'm a pilot, a commercial pilot, how do I tell my boss that I can't fly on Saturdays? Or stewardess, if the flight, I'm flying an airline from the Caribbean to England, it's 8 hours. We start on Friday afternoon, but then we get into Sabbath issues. How do we deal with those matters? Should we be telling our members, from your legal perspective advisor, should be telling our members, be mindful of these kinds of careers?
Okay, so I'll start off, Dr. Greene. I think we all recognize that there are certain occupations that present challenges, no doubt. I remember I was at a men's ministry program sometime just before the pandemic started. And one gentleman said that his son told him he wanted to be a pilot, and his response was, well, why do you want to leave the church? Right? Because in his mind, getting into aviation was automatically a gateway to breaking Sabbath observance, and a slippery slope to eventually leaving the church. So in addressing your question directly, I think it is wise to let individuals know that there are certain occupations right off the bat that are going to present challenges. When we look at the aviation industry, which is what you mentioned, specifically zoned in on, you may start flying in one jurisdiction, but by the time you get to another jurisdiction, you are, because of the time zones, you're working on the Sabbath. And this is for pilots as well as stewardesses as well. And so it is for the individual. Of course, we still have freedom of conscience and freedom of choice. And so it is for the individual to make a determination whether they wish to pursue this, recognizing that there are serious challenges that they are going to have. And then if they so decide, they can still have a conversation with the employer and let the employer know that these are my limitations. This is, yes, I want to do this as my source of employment, but these are my limitations. So I'm only going to fly Monday to Thursday if that's what it takes to make sure you don't break the Sabbath. But Pastor Sam last thing started laughing because it may not be very practical, and so the individual will have a choice to make. And I think we can't skirt around the issue. You make a determination to get into that field, and you either are going to make sure you don't work on that day, and you may run into the reality that an employer is not going to tolerate that, and you may not be able to work with the employer, or you're going to have to make the other determination, which is that you're going to work on the Sabbath. But I don't think we can turn a blind eye to the fact that if someone makes that determination that they're going to fly on the Sabbath, that it is not cohesive with what we believe. And we don't, the Adventist Church does not consider when someone is flying on the Sabbath, even across time zones, as though, well, it is something that is essential for work, and it's, there's no middle ground. You can't ride the fence on this issue.
I think, Dr. Greene, that perhaps as youth leaders and members of the church, it is important to highlight aspects of a particular career that someone can run into that would be potentially violative of their religious beliefs. And I say that broadly because sometimes it's not just a Sabbath issue. Sometimes it's other issues that, you know, can infringe on our practice. But however, I am a little leery of saying outright, you know, as an Adventist, you shouldn't get into this career. But I see two sides. A lot of times we choose careers that we don't anticipate issues that we can run into when it comes to religion. And it's because we don't see all aspects of what has to be done in that career. And I also think that sometimes people assume that certain careers have issues when it comes to religious observance. And I say that, for example, as an attorney growing up in a church, or someone wanting to be an attorney growing up in a church, I heard for a very long time that as an Adventist, you should not want to be an attorney. And I never really understood it. I know a lot of people said, you know, attorneys are liars. And so as a Christian, you shouldn't aspire to be a career that lies. And I mean, I never really entertained it because I just felt to myself that lying is a choice. So if I choose not to lie, then I don't see the issue. But that's an example of someone thinking you go into that career, never having been there, and thinking that there's a potential issue where it really doesn't exist. So I think a lot of times as professionals, we need to be able to manage ourselves as Christians, as Adventists, in a manner where we are not violating our own rights. Don't leave it up to somebody else. And do our research and determine if this is something I could get into and still respect my religious beliefs. I don't know, though, that for those of us who have not been in those careers, that we should directly say, no, don't do that because you're going to be violating your religious belief. However, there are careers that you blatantly have to violate, and those are obvious, and you should warn against those. I think one of the ones that's often overlooked, not necessarily a career, but entrepreneurs, people who own stuff like gas stations, marts, or a security company, or so many I could call. There's so many times that you have to be called on Sabbath to deal with stuff that, you know, for your business. You know, is that violative? Do you have to shut down if you own a plaza? Should you shut down your plaza on Sabbath where you have tenants that don't necessarily worship on Sabbath? So there's so many different avenues and aspects of this that we have to consider. And it's something that, as Attorney West indicated, the individual has to be able to do their research and determine, as youths do. When we think about our future and careers, we don't think about Sabbath observance, to be quite honest. Most youths just think about the money, what they want to do, which career they want to be in. They don't think about the impact it would have on their religious beliefs. Some don't even think about religion because they're not even in that frame of mind at the time they're thinking about career. So I think it's good to warn and to advise, but I would be hesitant to say outright, don't do that.
I mean, you're raising some real serious issues there. I saw Pastor Samuelson smiling just now when you spoke about attorneys, because there was I did hear people say, oh, you can't be a Christian and be an attorney. Well, I mean, can you imagine when this pastor decided that he was going to do law, what it must have been? Because not, you know, but it is an important area that you're raising there, because there are the issues relating to God's call on your life and how you can make a difference for him. Likewise, of course, there are, I mean, the Adventist Church has missionaries. We have mission fields where we have pilots who have to fly these airplanes into areas, you know, to do missionary work, etc. They are private companies. So there is flexibility, but which is why I specifically said commercial. You know, if you're not guided, you can find yourself in a situation where the choices are really, really hard. You also raised the issue of if you have a plaza, we will one of these days have a discussion on Sabbath observance. And if we go back to the text, to what God says, because my ass and my male servant and my manservant, etc., should keep the Sabbath. So if I have a business and I am renting heavy duty equipment, should I be renting my heavy duty equipment to be working on Saturdays when I am not working on Saturdays, if I'm the owner for it, etc.? These are concerns that pop up every now and then. I'm building a house. I give a contractor a job. Do I tell the contractor, listen, I'm a Seventh Adventist, I don't want you building on Saturdays? Fine. Some other persons say, well, I gave him the contract. He works when he wants. I can't tell him when to work and when not to work. I think it is important for us to have these kinds of discussions so that our people can understand what true Sabbath observance is really all about.
Dr. Greene, what I can say in relation to that last example is that if you give the contract to a Seventh-day Adventist contractor, then you avoid all the issues. So I'm just throwing that out there.
So can I add, Dr. Greene?
Yes.
Well, law was my first choice as a career, but when I approached my parents, they said to me that lawyers are liars, and they sat me down and they said to me they will not finance my education at university to study law. So they made a choice, and I went on to study engineering, electrical engineering technology. But eventually, I had to go after my first passion, which was law. And of course, after engineering, I went into theology and then into law. But I'm saying this to say that, in terms of careers, and this is why we need now in the church to have a number of career guidance seminars for young people as they are growing up, moving from tertiary education into the world of work. Or even before that, we need to guide them as it relates to their career choices so that they would not face with these challenges. And even if they do, they will know that beforehand, they would have received, some bit of education as to making choices as it relates to career. May I also add that one of the things that we need to do is to encourage our members to get into entrepreneurship and to establish business enterprises on their own so that they will save themselves many of the challenges that some of our members have when they get into some of these careers. I know, if I can give you an example, and I know my younger brother would not mind when he views this production. We both joined the church as young men, and he was a very vibrant preacher. And my elder brother, who was a police officer, encouraged us to get into the police service. I myself, did the examination, and when it was time to go into the academy for training, I decided not to. But my younger brother, who was an Adventist, he went in the training, and today he's like, in out the church. He visits church sometime, but so getting into some of these careers can really take us away from the church, especially as we grow in the ranks of some of these careers. He's a senior policeman going into retirement now, but I know it has affected his religious practices as it relates to Sabbath keeping. So, when I do careers guidance seminars, I put all of the information to the young members of our church. I remember when I decided to study law, I was a pastor, and some of my colleagues, damned me, they said that you can't be a pastor and be a lawyer. And I said, well, it is possible that you can be an honest attorney, and so on and so on. Although I'm not into practice, I am a pastor. That's my main, form of employment, but it's very challenging. I know many in our year, there were about 3 or 4 Adventists who studied, and they are Adventists in good standing in the church. holding office in the church. So yes, you can get into some of these careers without being corrupted by the, the lifestyle of the world and so on.
With the remaining time we have, which is not very many minutes, that is, I want to speak to some of the other careers that can be a little challenge. There are a few persons who had conversations with me, and so want to get your take as attorneys. You mentioned, Dr. Samuel, saying the matter of police. Whether we call that essential services, we have looked already at the matter of how the church addresses the issue of essential services. But then there is also the matter of security officers. There's the matter of prison officers. If I'm a prison officer, do I tell my boss, listen, I'm a Seventh Adventist, I really can't work on Saturdays, and should I take that stand? Should the prison superintendent decide you're going to be dismissed because you are leaving the prison unprotected, unguarded? Should I find another career? Or is it something that I can work with? So there are these other areas that tend to border on, I have a question here, in fact, and maybe I should put it in one time because we don't have much time. And this person is saying, I'm a medical doctor. Let me see if I can pull this question up. Where is it? Hold a second. Wow. The person says, if I'm a doctor or officer who has to work on Sabbaths and I'm paid monthly, should I take out the funds for all the Sabbaths I work and put towards my tithes and offerings? So there are these issues that people tend to be not very clear on. One person practices this here, another person practices that way. I know I'm throwing in a lot here because of time, but let's just talk to these issues as we wrap up this afternoon.
As it relates to some of the careers like police and prison guard and such, I think that's an example of what we mentioned last time, that there's some careers that you just know there may be potentially a Sabbath issue. And yes, I think that you should contemplate whether it's something that you want to do or can do, or if it will be violative of your what you believe, and understanding too that your belief system or how you grow as a Christian could change from when you start out in a career to where you end up, and you have to take all of that into consideration. So I think things like police, prison guard, yes, there are some issues there that could potentially infringe, because technically the jail doesn't close. People are going to get arrested all the time. It's open 24/7. The employer cannot help that. They need people to man it. And there may be ways you can navigate that. And that can be fluid depending on where you are. Like there may be 30 jail employees in St. Thomas, whereas in St. John, where it's smaller, you only have 3. And the employer has to navigate, how am I gonna man these violent offenders, quote unquote, with just 2 persons if you're, so these are things you have to think about. This is an example of a career that you need to let your employer know head on, what you're about, and see if they can accommodate you. And if not, maybe that's something you contemplate shifting. In regards to medical doctor, same. I mean, people get sick, especially if you're in private practice or you're emergency room doctor, you're on call, and you can't necessarily say, well, I'm not going to come and, revive this person who was shot because, it's Sabbath. You run into some other religious issues there. So there's seriously a balancing act. Yes, those careers are the ones where you really have to contemplate. If you really feel like you cannot keep your Christian values and act in this career, then maybe that's something that you do not do. If you do not feel like you working on Sabbath, even if you don't give a portion of your salary to the church is violative, then go right ahead. A lot of it sometimes is very personal, and we have to think about that.
If I should add, Dr. Greene and councils, I know in Trinidad here recently, a young Adventist medical doctor worked in the public system, and I know him well because I pastored his church many years ago, way back in the 2001, 2002 thereabout. And he became a medical doctor, worked in the public system, health system. And, he told me once that, when he had to be out at the institution on Sabbaths, it always bothered his conscience. He was not comfortable, working on Sabbath, even though he was providing an essential service. And eventually, just a few years now, he left the public system, and he has his private practice. And when you look at his card, he made it very clear. I am at the office, on Sundays up until Friday at 3 o'clock. So he closes his office at 3 o'clock, and he made it clear that he's closed on Sabbath because as far as his conscience was concerned, even though he was providing a service to humanity, he felt that he was violating the Sabbath principle. So, it's a matter of conscience. There are some folk who can say, okay, well, hear what? The church allows that this is an essential service and I can work on Sabbath. And there are some individuals who in their mind know that they cannot comfortably keep Sabbath that way. So, in terms of counseling young members of the church, I try to help them to understand that, try your best to choose a career that may not or less likely require you to be out to work on Sabbath.
Yeah, certainly. I think it is important that, because we are preaching the gospel all the time, we will find police officers and prison officers and others who may hear the gospel and make a decision to follow Jesus while they are already in the career. Pilots and air stewardesses and those kinds of things, and then that's a little different approach to an individual who has not yet gone there but decide against the odds that I'm still going there. Our people, I believe, must learn to trust God, must learn to believe and understand that God says, I like Matthew 6 and verse 33, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all other things will be added. And sometimes, unfortunately, we put finances above our duty to God and see our relationship with him deteriorate. Well, attorneys, I have to say that our time is just about up. We will give you time to wrap up. I do want to take the time to express gratitude to all of you for this very meaningful discussion. We have raised a number of important issues. So those who are listening, who have charge of the young people, the matter of career guidance is extremely important. We have seen people, as a result of their work environment, drift away from God and go cold in their relationship with him. So that matter of career guidance is very important. Next week, actually, on Let's Talk, we're going to be talking to some Seventh-day Adventists who we're getting practical now, who once left the church and returned. And we're going to be talking about, why did you leave? What was your experience out there? What prompted you to return? That's an important discussion. And I know that lots of people have had this experience, but we can help maybe some congregations, maybe the level of fellowship in the congregation, and even some individuals who may be struggling and may be tempted to leave. It is an important discussion, and you want to join us next week for that. Well, attorneys, we're going to give you 30 seconds each to wrap up, to give your closing thoughts and ideas. Again, thank you so much for sharing with us. We really do appreciate it. Who do we begin with? Pastor Samuel Singh?
Yes, thank you very much. The scripture tells us, and I've believed it, for 44 years almost now. The psalmist says, I was young and now I'm old, and I've never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. And I just want to indicate that God has promised to provide for us and to supply all our needs. So what we need to do in these trying times and in these last days, especially where our economies are so challenged, is to trust God, because God can provide for all our needs.
Wonderful. Attorney West.
Thank you, Dr. Greene. You know, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking the summation of these three programs is that it is good to do good on the Sabbath. And that is the church's position. The reality of Sabbath observance has a lot to do with the individual conscience as well. And there will be gray areas. You know, we as individuals don't always have the answer, but one has to look at their individual conscience. You have to look at your relationship with Christ. There will be areas that aren't gray at all, that there will clearly be a violation of Sabbath observance. But in those areas of emergencies, the individual will have to make a choice. We start with the constitutional provision of freedom of choice. The individual will have to make a choice as to whether they are violating and cannot live with working in emergency type situations, or whether they have to maybe think about another profession or having a conversation with their employer. But there is always a choice to be made. And if you have to choose Christ.
Yes, and I would just add, just continue to strengthen your relationship with God. And, you know, I think once you do that, he will guide you. He has given us talents that we're to use, and we use it to better our society. And if we do come into a situation with Sabbath observance that we need to handle, we already have God on our side. We need to do it with love. If we need to rely on our religious liberty leader for some guidance, we can do that. But let's continue to be guided by God and what his will for our life, not our own will, but his will. And once we do that, then we should be okay. We will struggle, but we should be okay at the end.
Thank you all so very much. Remember, next week, we're talking perspectives on those who left the church and returned. And may God bless you. Keep trusting God. We are sorry that we were not able to respond to all the comments in the chat. Such is life. Let's talk. We'll be back next week, and we continue into the future. God bless you.